very much. Good morning. 12 years ago, I was working as a creative director, big agency, working on huge communication projects, earning loads of money, getting off on an aeroplane 150 times a year, eating in the best restaurants, traveling first class, all of that kind of stuff. But I started to ask the question, what was the future of marketing and communications? Partly because of my experience, I'd seen the world already starting to evolve and change. And that led me down a path and on a journey that profoundly changed me as a person and how I saw the world. And it deeply concerned me about where I thought our world was going. I wrote a book in 2005 called Communities Dominate Brands. And the last 7 years, I've been on something of a quest in diving deeper into trying to understand what are the forces that are driving the transition and change in our world. So what I'm going to do in this brief time I've got with you is to give you some headline points of view on why I think that's happening, but to share with you 6 principles which actually I think kind of are very much part of a navigational guide. And I use that word mindfully in terms of how we think what our future could look like if we want to make it a better place for all of us. So we are in transition. Our world is moving from a linear world, an industrialized world with its own ways and rules of operating and functioning, to a non-linear world. And that's having implications socially, organizationally, and economically. And the reality is that all of those 3 things are co-joined together. When I wrote No Straight Lines and I was talking to publishers, they said to me, "So what's your book about?" And I said, well, it's about the complexity of the industrial world that we live in today. And it's about thinking through and seeing the world through this lens of social, organizational, and economic problems. They went, that's a bit complicated. You can pick one of those. You can write a book about social life. You can write a book about organizational theory, or you can write a business book. And I said, well, that's the problem. So the reality is that I see a world that is being overwhelmed by complexity. And the industrial world, in terms of how it thinks it operates and deals with that complexity, is failing. If you look at actually things like the NHS, our pensions, our financial systems, organizations like Nokia or Kodak that are really struggling with the transition from the way they used to operate and do business to the way that they could or should be doing business in the future. In 2006, IBM released a report that said 8 out of 10 CEOs looked at this sort of unfolding future and felt it to be increasingly uncertain. And that actually they didn't really have the tools or the means by which to actually navigate through that future in a way that gave them confidence. I would say, passionately, that one of the problems we've got with the world that we currently have is that we are placing an economic value on every aspect of human life and how we run every aspect of our organizations. And the problem with that is it's not very healthy. The consequence is actually huge damage done to us as people, as humanity. Bizarrely enough, materially, spiritually, and psychologically. But the interesting thing is that there was a guy called John Stuart Mill who wrote a book called On Liberty in 1859. And he said that human nature is not like a machine and described humanity that should be more like a tree. And although we all look the same, we're all actually incredibly unique. And it's the sort of diverse forces that make us unique living human beings that actually should be the thing that allows us to live and grow. And the problem is that the way we are asked to educate our kids, to quite often lead our working lives, means that actually we can't be this multidimensional, wonderful, diverse, unique thing. So what we need is not a reboot, but a system upgrade. And actually what I think we are witnessing, because humanity is incredibly resilient, is to upgrade to what I call the human OS, the human operating system, that's driving a will to change this world in a very different type of way. I see it's no accident that we see huge explosions in the world of entrepreneurship, social innovation, the will to change and drive the world in a different type of way, because as our first speaker very rightly said, that actually the younger generation is coming to this world with a very different set of views and beliefs about how this world should be operating and functioning. So the question then is, well, what is it do we want? What drives this human operating system? Well, I think it's these things. We actually want greater opportunity. We want greater freedom. We want greater empowerment, diversity, efficiency, independence, and God forbid, we might need a bit more beauty in the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. And by that, I mean beautifully designed organisations, beautifully written code, a way in which we engage and interact with each other, can have an aesthetics and a beauty about it, which is actually no bad thing for us as human beings. And for me, this is a really important point, that obviously we are, or seem to be, completely and utterly obsessed with technology at the moment, because it's there in our face. But the point is that technology does not come out of nowhere. And it only succeeds or fails when it meets fundamental human needs. Fire, electricity, the will, the internal combustion engine. And so the fact is that if our world is becoming inherently more connected and more social, where actually it doesn't matter what industry you look at, people are coming together to reorganize and rethink how those different types of industries can work, it's because we are driving it towards that direction. You know, I challenge people when they go on and on and on about Facebook, that somehow it's switched the world onto sharing, part of the sparkiness that I had with the gentleman that Andrew talked about. And so we have to understand that. And it is only a tool. But it's the human operating system, the desire that what we want as people is driving the world to transition in the way that it currently is. So I think a lot of people now aren't asking what if. They're asking how. And they're saying, how can we design and create better societies, better functioning organisations, and more vibrant and relevant economies to the world we live in today, all at the same time? And of course, that is massively disruptive for a lot of existing businesses. Because we want a greater equality. We want a better world where we feel it's fairer. And that inherently is about power. Who has it and who wields it. The Leveson inquiry and the phone hacking scandal is one primary example of what I mean. So, the navigational guide. What did I see? Because actually in the book and the project, what I've become really fascinated by is those individuals, start-up companies, large organisations, even cities, have actually transformed themselves against some really challenging, I can't sleep at night problems. So the first one is ambiguity. And for me, the problem why a lot of organisations whether it's in the commercial or the non-commercial sector, struggle is because they stay in an ambiguous state. They dismiss things. They don't understand things. This language here actually describes a car manufacturing company. Now, not many car manufacturing companies use Creative Commons, open legal frameworks, participatory tools. They have a global community, participatory media. They are using co-creation. They're using 3D flex manufacturing. They're using open source technologies. They're building micro factories. And the reality is that if you cannot meaningfully start to build patterns in terms of actually what next might look like for you and understand those things properly, then you're never going to be able to get your organization from where it is to where it could be in a better place. So if we keep using the same language to describe the same problems, we're never going to move forward. So for me, this idea about evolving and developing our language is very important. It's why I have a problem with the word social media, because actually it means Twitter, Facebook, maybe a bit of LinkedIn, but it's not actually getting us into the richness and the deepness and the granularity of actually how we can start to describe different ways of operating and functioning. So this was a philosopher. The limits of my language is the limits of my world, and I think that's really, really important to understand. The next one is adaptiveness. The ability to adapt is very important. So if we've got our pattern recognition, if we've got the ability now to build different types of patterns around our industry, our business, whatever it is we're doing, we can now start to think about how we adapt. So we need to be in a process of creating, collaborating, critiquing and communicating with each other inside our organizations to start to think about what our world could look like, how the business could operate differently, how that organization could function. You'd be able to stand back and to be able to evaluate properly technology, tools, processes, opportunities to decide how and where they might be deployed within the business. Bunch of cows, what have they got to do with this story? Well, interestingly enough, Yeo Valley Farm, we all know what Yeo Valley Farm is, okay, in this room? The largest organic dairy farm in Britain. Now, Tim Mead, who's the owner of Yeo Valley, is not an open-toed, brown rice-eating, tree-hugging man. He's actually an accountant. And 25 years ago, he took over the farm. It was his parents' farm, and it was going bankrupt. And we had a long conversation, and he was telling me the story that he said, there are two forms of volatility in my business that I have no control over, but is actually driving it out of business. One is that running the farm on an oil-based economy, so the cost of fertilizers, pesticides, all of that stuff we need, is making it very, very difficult because the prices in oil are going up and down all the time, and so I have a very destabilizing impact on my cash flow. The other thing I've got is the whimsies of supermarkets. So we have to grow the farm to a certain size to deliver to them, but then they say, oh, Tim, this week we only want 50% of your milk. And he says, the problem is that I can't turn the cows off 50%. So the reason why Tim turned his farm from an oil-based farm to an organic farm was on a long-term view of economics. And the interesting thing is, and I think this was being discussed yesterday, is that what Tim did was incredibly unorthodox at the time he did it. You must be mad, Tim. Whereas he now runs a very resilient business because of being able to recognize a pattern, think it through, evaluate it properly against the existing thoughts of the day, and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to adapt our business. The next one is openness. Far too much of our industrialized world has become a monoculture. Look at our high streets and look at why they're suffering to some degree. So for me, openness is a language we need to use and develop and think about. So open to new ideas. How many people, you find when people are really pushed, are they prepared to be truly open, to engage with something which previously and to that point made them feel fearful? Think about the open organization, open innovation, open ecosystems, open business models, open APIs, open data, the open city, even the open society. It's a whole different way of thinking about openness. Openness built actually on trust and mutuality is very much part of, I think, the zeitgeist in terms of philosophically, but also practically, of how we bring a richer diversity. And it's very different. In an industrial world, when we do business, the deal is this. Andrew and I are going to do a deal, and the good business is I really, really win, and Andrew really, really loses. And I go home and think I've done a good job. Whereas actually in an open model, I want to meet Andrew and say, Andrew, how do we really win together? What's the way that we can come mutually together to do something together that is really going to be of huge value? So for me, this is really important. And one of the reasons why we live in an incredibly unfair world for many people is because actually we will not operate on the basis of openness. It's also a great attractor. The next one is participatory cultures and tools. And we comes from Muhammad Ali being interviewed, and I was 10 years old when I heard him being interviewed by Michael Parkinson, and Parky said, Muhammad, you write poetry, don't you? What's your shortest poem? And he said, we. And when I was working on those straight lines, and I'm 46, so that's 36 years ago, somehow this we, locked in the deep freeze of my brain, came out. Because so much of what I was reading and looking at in terms of actually what makes us as human beings, what makes us good human beings, what makes for healthy societies, is in fact this ability for us to be able to collaborate together. Human beings are designed to work in aggregates. They're not designed actually to work alone. What's the worst thing that you could do to a human being other than shoot them? You put them into solitary confinement, right? So participatory cultures, when you study it, when you look at it and you understand it, which is different to social media, although there are obviously elements in there which overlap, show that collaborative effort offers entirely different types of organisational capability. It offers you the ability to perhaps run your business in a more lightweight way. It could give you the ability to accelerate innovation. It could give you the ability for peer-to-peer learning, either within inside the organisation or from inside to outside. It could give you the opportunity to create what we call participatory leadership, where actually the idea is that the knowledge of actually what our best possible future looks like doesn't reside in the mind of one person in this room, but actually in the minds of all of you. And there are tools and capabilities that allow us to be able to lead each other down that road, but it's a very, very different type of model. To think about the company truly as a community. Stop using the word consumer and start talking about your customers as actually people that are part of a community, because that will completely change your behaviour towards them. You don't call your wife a consumer. You don't call your husband a consumer. You understand that the rules of engagement are entirely different. So if our world is inherently moving towards a more social premise, then we have to really address that. And we also should be therefore thinking about the collaborative enterprise. This is a very different way of thinking about how we work. The fifth one is craftsmanship. Now, for me, because I was actually trained as a typographer and a graphic designer, and I've been a filmmaker and an artist and all of these sorts of things, when I kind of think about this, I understand it intuitively. I also understand for other people that sometimes is a little bit of a stretch. But what we see is this, that the craftsman is hand, heart, and mind. So when people ask you, what is it you do? Are you a thinker or a doer? You say, well, actually, I'm a craftsman, and I apply all of these skills all at the same time. The craftsman also asks himself or herself, is what I make for the collective good? Is the business we are running delivering for the collective good? Are we truly creating value in society? I think that came up in a previous conversation and presentation this morning. The craftsman is always open to new ideas. He or she has the ability to hold different concepts in their head and to be able to explore those. And that is why they become very good pattern builders. They're curious. And the reality is that the craftsman or craftswoman is self-confident in actually being able to create their future for themselves. One of the problems that existing organisations have is that they're not craftsmen and craftswomen. They've got a problem. They want to buy a company or something that just solves that problem and make the pain go away. Well, your pain is not going to go away. And so learning to be able to be the architects of that future is incredibly important. The sixth one is epic. Now, epic comes from a gamer term. The gamer seeks the epic win. And all of the projects that I've looked at, big or small, are in fact about organisations, individuals, communities creating transformational change. So my challenge for people is, for organisations, when we work with them, is actually, what's the transformation you are going to make? These are the navigational tools and guides that we can help you with and to understand them deeper. But the reality is that you really need to think about how you design for transformation. And recently we were working with a €1 billion company, and they admitted that they weren't innovating with their business models. They were organisationally in disarray, partly due to the fact that some lovely consultancy companies come along, charge them lots of money, and really mess them up. People in the company had low morale. So, and it goes on. So we said, well, it's not therefore about a 10% increase in efficiency. You've got to really think about how you create transformational change in your business. Now, up here are just some examples that I wanted to share with you. At the top, Nova Scotia, the health authority there, realised that they weren't delivering frontline services against a limited budget. They needed to change. But rather than bringing in a bunch of consultants that were specialists in healthcare, they said all of the people that live in Nova Scotia and all of the doctors and the nurses and the clinicians and the people that provide services within Nova Scotia are the ones that will work out how our best future looks like. So this is what we call participatory leadership. And it is difficult. There are some slamming doors sometimes. But the reality is that if you imagine that all of us were part of the same community, and that through a process of being able to reveal and give our knowledge and information, that could be harnessed, that could be understood, that we could all then share that knowledge and information and start to realise what the limits and possibilities are of actually what we could or should be doing. We can all leave this theatre together with our hearts knowing that this is the right thing to do. We've co-created it. We've built the narrative. We've embedded ourselves into that story and that strategy. The Ordnance Survey now releases all of its data under a Creative Commons open license. So they allow people now to use that data to build other services and other products. So that's an example of using open data, a way of operating. Patients Knows Best is a business which enables people to manage their chronic long-term health care in collaboration with clinicians. So rather than actually going to the GP and then the GP sends you to the specialist, etc., 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 there is an online platform now which is being used by 7 major London teaching hospitals. I think it actually may be being used down here in Devon somewhere. But what it means is that by patients and doctors working together, there's much deeper knowledge about how to manage people's common ailments and unique circumstances, so that actually what you get is a dramatic reduce in the wrong prescription of drugs, the clogging up of specialist times in hospitals, and that actually the effectiveness and efficiency of Patients Knows Best is increase of an order of magnitude of 2. So that's an example of designing for transformation, new pattern building, that participatory cultures are actually not something that is an addendum to, but a fundamental part of the process. Ushahidi is a crisis management platform that is actually the most used and deployed in the world, that was built entirely out of open source software with a global volunteer force that were highly motivated to help put this together. Grow VC is the world's first venture fund funded by a global community. In 3 years, where they say the next Silicon Valley is not a place, it's a platform, 15,000 members in 200 countries, where they allow people to actually build their own micro networks as well. So they're offering tools and capabilities. Yo Valley, I mentioned. Creative Commons is the open licenses, which give people the permission not to lock down their content, but to be able to share that content in a variety of different ways. And it's very much part, I think, of our open future. And Lego, I think, is a very interesting company which actually have one business model and one way of doing things, and faced with nearly going bankrupt through a little bit of luck, and then actually some really hard work, understood that they had to actually start to co-create their future with their customers in very different types of ways. And so they've actually built a much more resilient business. So I think we have the opportunity to transform our world if we see what's in front of us as a unique design challenge and say that we can actually build better societies. We can create organizations that run much, much more effectively. And we can actually create a vibrant economy for once which our industrial world was celebrated for. Thank you very much.
Alan, thank you very much for coming and talking to us about your vision of a new human operating system. I love that, a system upgrade. Fantastic. We actually had Juliana Rotich from Ushahidi come and speak here at Like Minds,
Yep.
And she was fabulous. A great business. Go and check it out if you want to have an example of a business that's actually putting into action much of what Alan here is talking about. I guess the question here, though, is that none of this will really make any difference unless the powers that be that you referred to actually buy into how this is going to happen and how this is going to take place in the future. It's all very well us going out and building businesses, that are sustainable or that have, future well-being of the planet built into them. Mm-hmm. But it does take political will. It does take the desire to change in all communities, not just by certain individuals and so on. Mm. How do we go about actually spreading that word and getting that out there?
I think it's already happening in many ways. I think that these are just small snapshots of actually, I think, a much, much bigger movement. There's a saying which is actually when institutions fail, people actually just go around them when they've got the tools to create new things. I think that this is all, all these stuffs I've not taken them from, a dream place. They're all real businesses. And so I'm saying it's pragmatic, it's realistic, and it's doable now. And don't build your business on an industrial model. Build it on a model that's purpose-built for the 21st century and beyond. I think that, as I mentioned, the Leveson inquiry, those organisations that just completely refuse to resist that the rules of engagement are different will ultimately fall over and die. And so I think there is already a massive upward pressure. And the reality is that those companies that stay in power, want to stay in power, will resist and resist and resist, and to the point that actually they exhaust themselves. And then they become completely redundant. So, I think with Chris Moss yesterday, we were talking about the fact that we maybe need a new political party, because we feel that actually our politicians aren't really delivering for what we want. It's why we have such a low turnout. go out there and do it, make it happen. You know, you're the people in the room actually that are part of this future, and so that's what I would say.
Great. Okay. Well, Alan, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. No sparks today.
No sparks today. No, it's very gentle.
Thank you very much. A wonderful manifesto. I think if you coupled this with Robert Bean's brand strategy, his 9.5 rules for developing a brand strategy, with Alan's manifesto for a new way of doing business, then I think actually we've got a pretty stable and solid platform from which we can build out for our futures.
I hope so.
So Alan, thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us.
Thank you.